Welcome to Arkansas Week. I'm Dawn Scott. We appreciate you being here with us. Proposed ballot initiatives being rejected, Arkansas's Freedom of Information Act, and opioid settlement funds going toward creation of a first-of-its-kind center studying addiction. All topics that Arkansas Attorney General Tim Griffin is here to discuss today, and perhaps other issues. We do appreciate you being here with us as we wrap the year up. We just want to do a recap today with you.
Thank you for having me. I just left the dental chair, so bear with my speech.
We will get through this for sure. Hope you're okay. Well, let's start with the state's Freedom of Information Act. It was brought to the forefront during a special session called by Governor Sarah Sanders back in September in opposition to the widespread changes were opposed from even lawmakers within her own party.
Sure.
What did pass? It primarily had to do with her travels and security. And if you want to go into detail there, but I know you created an FOIA review working group back in June. Explain the goal of that and what you set out to accomplish.
So one of the things that I want to do, and am doing, is in a number of areas, look at the laws and make sure that they're modernized, clear, succinct. And it's not just on FOIA, on gun laws. And I've announced our efforts there. We have good gun laws in terms of the substance, but often legislators have to ask for clarification through opinions. And a lot of our citizens read it, and it's just overly complicated. So FOIA, gun laws, other places, I've said, look, if our laws are perfect and we look at it and decide they're perfect, that's great. But I had heard from a lot of people who wanted to address different issues or have them looked at. And I said, well, great. What's wrong with a discussion? What's wrong with a civil discussion? So what brought this on the FOIA issue, what brought it to my attention was the issue of ransomware and one of our school districts having to deal with ransomware. A cyber attack. And in fact, I think I learned of this from people just discussing it generally, but Senator Clark Tucker, a Democrat from Little Rock, had written and asked for an opinion on this because it appears that there are some things that have to be made public that would put you at a disadvantage in negotiating. So I said, look, I'm not an expert on ransomware or this particular area. Let's get the Press Association's executive director, who is a big advocate for FOIA, couldn't be any bigger. Let's get John Toll, the premier attorney for the Press Association, who is a big advocate for FOIA. Let's get Clark Tucker. Let's get David Ray, Breanna Davis, Senator Davis, and Representative Ray, and let's get these folks together with my staff and just let them discuss it. And that's what they're doing. I don't micromanage them. I don't tell them what to discuss, what not to discuss. I expect them to have some ideas later on in the year, and some of those individuals are behind the constitutional amendment. John Tull, Senator Tucker, and the executive director of the Press Association.
Well, that was my next question, because there is a separate group formed that's working on a proposal to put before voters to enshrine these FOIA requirements in the state constitution. It was submitted to your office earlier this week. Obviously, there's a number of issues there. One member suggested a conflict of interest, having you specifically, or Attorney General, with oversight of FOIA when your office may represent entities in court subject to FOIA disputes.
Well, if that was a conflict, then the Attorney General's office couldn't be involved in hardly anything because we are the state's attorney. It's interesting that someone said that. I don't know who that was, but this has been the process for about 80 years.
Sure.
About 80 years. There was a brief moment in time when we looked at another option, and that didn't work out so well. This is exactly where the process ought to be. And I think I've demonstrated in my 11 months now that I follow the law. I think what happens is people propose things, it gets rejected, and they get aggravated. But they have to understand that the process is fair, but it's robust.
Yeah.
Why? Because you're changing the law for 3.3 million people without going through the legislature, without going through the governor. You're just doing it as a private group or whatever. So yes, there has to be rigor. And I have shown that the topic is not of particular relevance here. We have to follow the rules. Law. And let me just say this, and I've made this abundantly clear numerous times. The process in my office is one where I don't even see the acceptance or rejection, the opinion, which is how it manifests itself. I don't even see that until it's completely done and offered to me for final approval. The professionals who have been working on this, many have worked for several attorneys general over the years, Democrat and Republican. They do this work, and you know how many I've changed since when they've come to me for final approval? 0.
Right.
We've had about 100 opinions this year, some of which relate to these proposals, and I've changed the conclusion on 0. 0. I've made stylistic changes about 5 times out of 100, but we have incredible attorneys. So look, if you get rejected, of course you're frustrated, and many people are quietly frustrated. Others are frustrated in the press, but that doesn't change the law. And we can't change our standard so that we don't hurt someone's feelings. They've got to regroup and submit a second time or a third time or whatever it takes. We approve ballot measures, and others we reject. So I would just say keep trying, and we'll keep applying the legal standard.
Well, moving on to proposed ballot initiatives, your office has rejected titles or language of items several entities would like voters to consider, including requiring the use of paper ballots, tightening requirements for absentee ballots, and repealing the state's abortion ban. So, you know, it's not unusual for proposals to be rejected, sent back to groups. Just like you said, it's just part of the process.
Usually they're rejected almost always, regardless of who the AG is, on the first time. Almost always rejected from, at least in my experience. So they're not going to get it just right the first time. It's a back and forth. It's in public, and that's why you see this. Yeah. But that's not uncommon.
How do they avoid rejections? What do you do? What do you look for?
Well, I would say, first of all, it depends. Some are rejected where people are just not only ignoring the legal standard, but they're ignoring what we told them after the first and second time they were rejected.
Sure.
So you have those. But I talked to some of my professionals there about this. I said, you know, if we had to pick one thing, and I think that it's failure to define terms that are used in there. When you, lawyers are taught that something that is vague is subject to no reasonable interpretation. Something that is ambiguous is subject to 2 or more reasonable interpretations. And so we get some of these proposals that are either vague or ambiguous, and we are not quite sure what they mean, and the public's not going to be sure. So we can't even reach our analysis, which is it misleading? We are charged under the law with determining, is it misleading? Now, there are other standards that the Supreme Court will apply, length, complexity, those sorts of things. But our mission is to say, is it misleading or not? We can't even get to that analysis if we don't understand what they're talking about. So I think precision in word choice and defining what words mean
is primarily what you see.
That is
and
the
what
core.
Sticks out.
There are a lot of different things, and they're all different, but that's the core.
Well, there's consideration by some state lawmakers to repeal rules that prohibit legislators from accepting campaign contributions 30 days before and 30 days after a regular legislative session, In response to Representative David Ray, you said in an advisory opinion that such rules are unconstitutional.
They are. They're you know, I don't have the luxury of choosing which U.S. constitutional provisions I want to apply or not apply. In this country, we don't take an oath or fealty to a king or a queen, we take an oath and allegiance to the Constitution. And federal courts have been abundantly clear that blanket blackout periods, such as we have here, that stop citizens from speaking through political contributions are unconstitutional under the First Amendment. I don't think that's even a close call. In fact, it's not a close call. In fact, and we waste a lot of money in the state historically, because what happens is we pass things that many lawyers could have told you were unconstitutional. Sure. And we pass them anyway. And then we have to spend money defending them and then lose. So let me just tell you, in 1996, there was an Initiated Act 1 that had a number of provisions to try to rein in, stop, prohibit certain campaign finance activities. At least half of that has already been stricken by the federal courts, many of those provisions years ago. The blackout provision that was in our law was stricken, unconstitutional. So what happened is the legislature said, well, if the law's unconstitutional, we'll just make it a rule, not a law. That way it won't be unconstitutional. Here's the problem with that. That's looking at it from the perspective of whether the legislator can raise money. That's not the perspective of the Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court looks at this issue and says, are we stopping Don, Tim, Jeff, Bill, Susie from speaking through a contribution? That's the perspective, not from the recipient, from the giver. And so when you look at that, the Supreme Court has said, you can't just have a blackout period that says no one can speak. No citizen can speak through contributions during this period. You can't do that. It's unconstitutional.
But there's concern that the influence of big money is coming in. Yes, that's where this is coming from.
Yeah, well, as is usually the case, the intentions are often good, but you need data to back it up. What the Supreme Court has said is there is no evidence that people act any differently during a session. Look, we've had a lot of legislators go to prison. Let's be honest. House members, Senate members, both parties, Republicans, Democrats, many of them are sitting in prison right now. Most of what they're in prison for, in fact, I don't know if any of what they're in prison for has to do with taking money during a session. There may be one, I'd have to look specifically, but the point is, there's no evidence that people act any differently. This is what the federal courts have said. There's no, in the case where our law was stricken, they said to the state of Arkansas, I think that was 97, 98, that federal case, they said, look, state of Arkansas, you have shown no data. You can't just say, it just doesn't seem right. No, you've got to demonstrate data. Why? Because you've got to narrowly tailor the legislation under Supreme Court precedent. Why? Because this is the First Amendment. This is the highest level of scrutiny that the Supreme Court gives. It's called strict scrutiny. And it is given to our most precious rights. And speech gets the highest level of scrutiny. So when we're legislating anywhere around the speech world, you can't just willy-nilly go, well, I just feel like we need to ban these. Yeah. You've got to have some data, because the court's going to ask, did you narrowly tailor, and that's the standard, did you narrowly tailor your remedy in this particular case? And the courts have said blackout periods are the opposite of narrowly tailored.
Yes.
Because they're blankets. They're like, nobody at any level. Let me give you an example. Let's say that retired veteran Joe wants to give $5 to a candidate during the legislative session. He cannot do that. Is there any evidence that $5 contributions are the problem in any way with corruption? Well, the court would say, no, there's not. And in fact, if you ask legislators to demonstrate that there is, they would not have any data to show you that $5 contributions are a problem. Not narrowly tailored. It's unconstitutional. It's not a Tim Griffin thing. It's not a right thing. It's not a left thing. It's a law thing.
Got it. You hosted a Stop Overdose Summit in November. We don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to ask about this $50 million state opioid settlement that you got, that you're putting toward Arkansas Children's Hospital, which is studying addiction. What led to this decision? How important is this for our state in our last few minutes?
This is critically important. I wish we spent the most time on this, actually. This is really important. So I'm getting a lot of money over the coming years out of the opioid settlement, right? And the Municipal League, the County Association, and my office are each getting $140 million. A lot of that obviously has been committed already. There's a lot of ephemeral uses, meaning we're giving money to things that are going to be gone in a few years. Narcan, very much needed, expire in 3 years. Giving money to an addiction clinic. 2-3 years, that money's gone, right? So we're doing some of that. But what I, in my office, wanted to find was something that would be working on this long after I'm gone from the earth, 50 years from now, 100 years from now. And so I started surveying the landscape to find that. And we did not get a request from Children's. I called Marcy, the CEO. And I said, look, I want to do something infrastructure, permanent, long-term. And so I said, I said, how are we situated on pediatric opioid research and pediatric opioid care? And she said, we're not anywhere near where we should be in the state. And I said, well, who does this research? And she said, well, there's a lot of it that's not done. And I said, well, what if we created this massive center to put us on the map that will benefit adults and children, that will attract more money, right? If you're able to apply to the federal government, say, we are the center of this. Yeah. You'll get that extra money. So she said, I'd love it. She came up with a proposal. It was about $68 million. I said, I can give the 50 that we had already talked about, sort of where I was thinking, I think. And I said, let's not make it the Arkansas Center. Let's make this the best in the world, no matter where we have to get these scientists. Arkansas, Harvard, Duke, Stanford, wherever we have to get them, the best. So we all agreed, let's call it the National Center for Opioid Research. I'm so excited about that because that's going to be lasting. Yeah. And it's going to put Arkansas on the map. And we knew that Children's Hospital is known for excellence, and we knew that they would be able to execute this in a way that is true to what we all want.
Well, the physician and other professionals were on our broadcast earlier this year, just not long ago, talking about this. It's fascinating. Much more to come from that, and much more to watch in 2024. Attorney General Tim Griffin, we so appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts today.
The numbness is disappearing now.
Let's just keep talking.
Yep, keep talking.
All right, we'll be right back with more in just a moment.